With all caveats that I've tried to let go of, where you parenthetical something and you're like, okay, well, I know I'm not saying this about all people and blah, 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 which I know when we started this show, Andy, we did to an almost embarrassing frequency. I'm going to do that right now. So, with all caveats of bias, meaning I'm going to remember my own contributions to some of our previous conversations more than I'll remember anybody else's. I don't know about you guys. Maybe you're less selfish than I am, but whenever I look at a group photo that I'm in, other than if I have like a crush on somebody or whatever, I'm looking at my face first. I'm going to be like, what weird face did I make? Did they get me from a nice angle? So, likewise, as I summarize how we got to this spot, we are trying to solve the problems of patriarchy and matriarchy, which, as you know, can we're always destined to be solved in podcast form. We, many months ago, wanted to question, I think, an adage that is on bumper stickers, t-shirts, crochet, and various yarn and soft arts, as Andy related. Smash the patriarchy is something that at least I grew up with as kind of a normative statement of kind of social pushback or even quiet revolution. So we started examining that question, ended up being a two-part series. I'd say most of our time was actually spent early on just being like, well, what does this term mean? Because the term has such very specific denotation, but really strong emotional connotation, depending on who's saying it. People absolutely claim it, and this is something we kind of wrangled with, Andy. People absolutely claim it as something as like, this is the way, and they mean it in the best possible sense. Some people look at it as this is the way, and they mean it in the most negative possible sense. And a lot of times, those people are coming across at each other really from almost completely different definitional schema. And I think we realized too that we had, both you and I, a phenomenally, at least the culture I've been steeped in, phenomenally negative, generally speaking, view of patriarchy. That it kind of was like um, and that a straw man, sort of a straw man of what patriarchy is, that it's kind of only the negative. Here's all the worst things about this system, which are very obvious, I think, to a lot of people, or maybe just obvious to us who grew up in it. And then we had to wrestle with, okay, but wait, what have there been any outcomes? Is there any positive side to this for a long time, in which both of us ended up not wanting to smash anything. Now that's a little bit, I think, both of our instinct to kind of go, well, can't. Again, I've said a billion times on the show, I'm a 98 in openness. Like what? Let's bring in everything. Let's bring in everything, at least for theoretical, and then we'll burn it all down later. But let's at least start. Let's get everything in the room. So I thought it was funny, Andy. We've decided not to smash the patriarchy, which I think would be surprising. I was just opening my yearbook yesterday as a founding member of the University School of Nashville Women's Issues Club, really feminist club. I think to them, they would be like, how dare you not? And I was like, well, let's not smash anything. But when we moved to matriarchy, I think it was even more problematic because I felt like we had to wrestle past the opposite connotation, which was matriarchy is kind of presented in this ultimate steelman sense, where it's just like, look at all the good things about this, and let's not look at any of the bad. So I think for us, it took at least for my brain, I was like, it took a while. We had to like really, I feel like you have to hold your head still in order to not be pulled back by the lodestone of either strawman or steelman negativity, positivity. And at least so far, we decided not to smash it. Although, at least by the end of the episode, I have what I'm now calling the Jewish deli theory of the modern West, which is that we live in if you ordered the sandwich of our culture, you would order a matriarchy. But if you wanted it on rye bread, the thin layer on the top and the thin layer on the bottom, that would be patriarchy. So at least from the exterior, if you look at it from above, looks quite a bit like a patriarchy. And if you look at it maybe even from below, looks like it might be a patriarchy because we're the ones committing all the force against other people. But if you flip it in the middle, you realize it's 80% matriarchy. And that's at least the soft theory I've been playing with ever since our episode. But I'm super excited. We actually have a guest this week, only our second guest, to dig even deeper into this. And I actually think, in some ways, our guest, and you knew him better, so I want you to cue him up. In many ways, I actually feel like some of the stuff that you had been posting and discussing in public, um, were part of why this episode, we were like, we should really, yeah, he's brought up a good thing. We should talk about that. We should think about that. We should process that. And then instead of course, should we establish the matriarchy? Wouldn't really be fair to the patriarchy. So we're like, well, we have to figure out whether we would smash it or not. Andy, would you introduce our guest? I'm pretty excited, except for the homophonic aspects of our name, that he is here today.
What'd you call me?
Yeah. Hey, don't be homophonic, dude.
Thank you, Brendan, not to be confused with Brandon Peele. Thank you so much for joining us, Brandon. This is a long
Yeah.
time in the making, and I'll just briefly point out a couple of ways we know each other. We met somewhere around 2017, 2018, as I was entering the beautiful world of purpose work, where Brandon had been laying tracks for quite some time, and that quickly then led to us knowing each other, becoming friends, and learning together. Brandon introduced me to men's work, the Mankind Project specifically, which I've referenced a few times on this show. And um, you're an author. You've written, I'm not even sure how many books at this point, some about purpose, but more recently moving into the terrain of, what is the noble purpose of our nation? We're all Americans, and however we may identify with that, and I'm asking or I'm mentioning it
Yeah.
that way because our last interaction was at the end of your national pilgrimage, where you spent about a month venturing, starting in the Northeast, going through the Civil Rights South, and going to the indigenous origin of the country, and then uh, I say that because, as you often point out, we borrowed or stole so much of the origin, but I want to be careful not to say that the country was specifically birthed out of that. But then you brought it back and actually landed in my terrain in Chicago, and we held a beautiful circle together. Well, you held it, I organized it, and yeah, it's the way you throw yourself into your work, your heart, your beautiful mind, your whole being, your soul is really stunning. And I sense that you're somebody who's quite good at strong opinions held loosely, that you are constantly learning and reading really big books. And some of those books you've introduced me to. I did make it through The Dawn of Everything for a book club you led a few years ago. And at the end, I think I had it up to like 5x speed or something. So I'm not sure how well I retained the last few parts. But it is interesting because I was listening as I was reading that book for clues about matriarchal cultures, and I don't remember there being very many. I think they pointed that out at some point. So then that's led to I've seen you post and mention several times a book called Before War, which we mentioned on the show last time, which maybe is totally irresponsible since neither of us actually read it. Um, and so we thought, let's bring you on. You're somebody who is passionate and knowledgeable about this topic specifically. The
Yep.
question being, of course, should we smash the matriarchy? Part two. And it is, I will point out, slightly odd to do a part two on a topic where Brendan and I both voted no. But we thought, even if we agreed on the vote, there's more to discuss here. So we're very
For
grateful for you
sure.
to join us, our second guest ever. And before we hit record, I was saying, we usually start by establishing vocabulary because that's as Brendan pointed out, that's a good way to make sure we're not veering away from each other for no good reason.
Yep.
And you offered that this is worth revisiting. However we presented perhaps patriarchy and matriarchy, that could be adjusted or built upon. So I hand you the mic, my friend. Where do we go from here?
Well, thank you, brother, and thank you, Brendan.
Oh yeah, thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, it's awesome. Like I said, I love the first two episodes, patriarchy and matriarchy. Um, and yeah, so when it comes to terms, I'll just share what some of my basis for this is. I mean, yes, Dawn of Everything um, explored a lot of the egalitarian and hierarchical formations that would exist within the same society within the same year, and they would dissolve and reform. And So, I tend to look at things more in terms of, is domination held well, or is it kind of shadowy in a sense? Because there's always going to be, the cosmos is holonic or hierarchical in many ways and all that. And I just want to share just a couple like basis points that I'm, coming from. One is, as mentioned, the Before War book.
Hmm.
I highly recommend. Brendan, you might take issue with how it's written because it's not like super like tight, but it's ambitious and broad, which
Yeah,
Dawn of
yeah,
Everything had a similar kind of feel, very
yeah.
ambitious,
Big swings. Yeah,
big swings.
yeah.
And then the other one I want to put forth is not actually even academic so much as it is cultural. You get the light on this one. It's called
Mm.
Always Coming Home by Ursula Le Guin.
Mm.
And it's kind of a matriarchal post-apocalyptic imagining of what matriarchy could feel like. And
Hmm.
again, I'll define terms in here in a second, but
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just want to say that's kind of like the heart and the mind of where I'm about to share from. Um, so my understanding of when women are in power, uh, it tends to be a concern for the whole. It tends to be rooted in developing people at each stage of life, with like a lot of care on rites of passage, a lot of care on communal values expressed, upheld, um, and a deep valuing of all life forms, male, female, their contributions. Um, and so, from what Ursula has presented and what Alicia has presented, it seems like when uh, women are involved in leadership, uh, men tend to be a part of that, like to a very large extent. Like they value the male perspective, and over time, men tend to take more of that whole kind of female communal perspective. Um, and so it's less about domination over; it's more about power with and centering kind of these values of mothering and care and like almost like the ethos or the spirit of the gardener. Like, let's just create the conditions for everybody to have their best life, like, period. Like, and that might mean that Brendan and Brandon and Andy need to like go learn rugby as a young boy and then go on the hunts as a high schooler and then get into some border skirmishes as like a young 20 something. But for the most part, they're coming back to the lodge and doing their sweats and working in their trades or whatever it is. But we're not like institutionalizing power, institutionalizing violence, or trying to keep everybody whole and healthy. So when I think about matriarchy, it's an attempt to care for the whole. Whereas like patriarchy, my understanding again, this is more based on Alicia Davis' work, that some of these temporary hierarchical formations that you needed for long distance trade, for building a bridge, for removing rocks from a field, for building a lodge. There's got to be someone in charge. There's got to be apprentices, tradesmen, masters. There's got to be some kind of hierarchical formation. But when there's this climate event that this other fella, DeMeo, from his book Saharasia, talks about at 4,000 BCE, that like desertified North Africa through like Russia. And all of a sudden, shit got scarce. And these temporary hierarchical formations that Waingro and Graeber talk about became a little bit more permanent, a little bit more, there was more, like the ethos of the hunt became more like the ethos of the pillage, and then the ethos of the raid, and then the ethos of empire. And pastoralism and horseback and chariots basically became empire. And so it was either like you join up with the invaders or you fight them and get destroyed. And so what Alicia suggests is that this desertification, this scarcity climate event started to institutionalize dominator ethos. And then once the men came back having borne all this risk and are now providing the majority of the calories, which wasn't the case before. They're like, what about me? How do I make sure that like all this risk, I get something for that? And so I want to make sure the calories, the wealth, the cows, whatever, goes to my paternity. And that creates this whole dynamic to control women, their sexuality and fertility and all that kind of stuff. So I'll pause there.
Yeah. Well, this gets to something we were I was hinting at in the intro is how do you wrangle? Because you've done actually quite a bit of work too on rites of passage into manhood, and in some ways almost patriarchy detox, meaning like let's detoxify patriarchy, or even detoxify masculinity. Let's look at how many cultures have tried to sort of not press down to some degree, and then reroute some of the things that can end up sort of in domination structures. And also, you've researched into matriarchy. Is then like in that comparator, it's like the undue comparison problem, meaning matriarchy is all of this thing that is going for holistic goodness and making everyone flourish. And then patriarchy is not trying to do the same thing, which is so then you're not really even comparing matriarchy and patriarchy. You're comparing like toxic patriarchy to like the purest best version. So that's the thing I don't understand in a lot, and I'm seeing this in a lot of literature, especially academic. There's this odd thing that just like matriarchy good, patriarchy bad, and here's why this is bad, and here's why this is good. But you're creating a yin yang, whereas both systems have it, meaning because we can see in our modern society how female-led structures are are the most aggressively subjugating of difference of any structures. We see this in HR, we see this in education, you see this in academia, where women, now, of course, a lot of people will be like, well, no, this is matriarchy operating within a patriarchal shell. And so they've taken on the oppressor, like, and I've literally seen the argument in multiple papers. But then the problem is like, well, wait a second. So then matriarchy can never do anything wrong. And then you're basically like, anytime matriarchy is incredibly toxic and subjugative, then you're like, well, that's not even matriarchy then. You know what I'm saying? Like we have there's a definitional problem, and that's the thing I don't understand because I don't know where I've tried to find where it originated from, but at some point they seem to have come in as just like good organization and bad organization, and mother gets to be good and father has to be bad, which, as you know, for exploring masculinity, there's no reason for that. I mean, the ultimate expression of patriarchy is literally self-sacrifice. That is the stated ideal. We make the decisions, but we die first, and our whole goal is to make sure that you are. It's about the preservation, I guess, as opposed, in some ways, about preservation rather than flourishing might be a nice balance. Meaning, like we have to stay alive, so I have to die, and we're going to make as many decisions to keep you safe. Now that can end up subjugating because it's the same thing we all went through in 2020. In order to keep you safe, you have to do everything we say, which was an interesting. I actually think it was the 2020 is so fascinating because it was a really weird blend. It wasn't patriarchal, really, in some ways, but it wasn't really coherently collectivist either. So we got to see like what it was like when these forces wrangle. And actually, in some ways, it was almost toxic versions of both. But I was like, yeah, how do you wrangle with that when you're reading these things and you're like, that's not a due comparison. That basically says that every strong aspect of masculinity put into culture tends towards domination, but every strong aspect of femininity tends towards flourishing. Or for both of you guys too, just like how do we wrangle with this? Because I grew up obviously with the same inference.
Andy, you want to go?
No, you jump in. I'll go.
And I think that this is where the kind of men's work rites of passage stuff and women's work rites of passage stuff comes in because, it's another fun trope that I've seen posted online is like, it's like Hillary Clinton is what patriarchy looks like in a woman's body, and Zoran Mandani is what matriarchy looks like in a man's body. And so like gender almost has nothing to do with it. It's really just about what are the values you're centering. And so like we can kind of like almost get rid of like man, woman, mother, like it's like how are they showing up? Like how are they In Western culture, we have this term called gentleman, and it really just means like, are you attending to the needs of everyone in the room? And that's doesn't mean you're a dandy, doesn't mean you can't kick ass, doesn't
Yeah,
mean you don't provide for your family. It just means, is everyone's needs getting met here? Like, are you a good gardener? So I just kind of want to, if as much as possible, kind of remove our identities as men or women from what we're talking about here. Not that
well,
I'm
actually,
not trying to equivocate.
well, no, I just mean, but you have to pause that though, because that literally is rooted. These are gendered terms. They don't
Mhm.
have any functional reference without gender. I mean, meaning like patri is
Yeah.
literally father, so that is gender, meaning kind by begetting or birthing.
Mhm.
So they don't. So if you remove them from that, then essentially you're performing an act of patriarchal colonization. We're going to take these concepts rooted in every culture. We're going to go, you know what? They're not connected to what everyone on every culture thought they were. And then be like, let's just look at them as positive or negative. You know what I'm saying? I mean, even just procedurally, like I was like, that's even as you're starting to build the structure, I was like, well, wait a second. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I guess maybe another way to say it is like, um, one of the ways to hold patriarchy is concern for paternity rule. Like so concern for the offspring, like where my seed goes and where the calories associated with that seed and the privileges associated with that seed and all that. Matriarchy doesn't tend to have that. They tend to have, multiple partners, multiple children with multiple men. At least if these books are to be believed. And so there's not a concern for paternity. And so it doesn't mean that like there isn't like gender involved, but I just don't want to lose the fact that we're actually talking about values. We're not necessarily
Yeah, but you can't do, but what I'm saying, you can't do that. Like you can't remove values and then just basically put positive values with women because that's what it's doing, right? I mean, programmatically, positive
no.
values with women, negative values with men in terms
I
of
mean,
how it moves us.
societally, yes, that's what's happening. I mean, I'm just saying amongst us here in this room, like
Yeah.
let's take on like just the values of mothering, care, and tending to the children as like being ascribed to this word or concept. What do you want to call it? Like holarchy, call it human development or like community focused. And then there's like a set of values that's about dominating and exploiting and extracting. And those aren't male or female necessarily. We all have the line of good and evil running through our hearts. And so like I see, I see lots of people who identify as matriarchs or whatever, and then they'll have like pets that they like freaking torture and like do all this stuff too. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
they're like doing all these like patriarchal things to like kind of keep this, um,
Yeah. Yeah. Or
women
abortion is
rule.
probably, yeah, abortion's the strongest example,
Yeah.
right? Because matriarchy has led to the greatest, like matriarchal subjugation of other persons has led to the greatest number of intentional deaths in human history across all causes. Meaning abortion has produced more dead humans reliant on others, right? Especially we're going to get into pets, than all wars, all murders. I mean, it's the number one with the bullet. So it's a good example of how like holisticism involves subjugation or even like destruction of persons or genocide or whatever. You know what I mean? So that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
If you take it away from the gender, and then the problem is at the end of it, we're going to put it back into the gender as a value. So there's no reason
Yeah.
why, what I'm saying, there's no reason for patriarchy to somehow be domination. Certainly in our culture, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I can understand that. And from what I understand, birth control, abortion has always been a part of all societies. There's got to be means to control the population based on the resources of the valley or whatever the boundary is of that society.
Yeah.
And so there's prevention mechanisms, there's abortive mechanisms, and from what I understand, at least from some of these animist indigenous faiths, is that the soul doesn't attach to the embryo initially. It
Yeah.
waits and it hovers above the mother and father. Like, is this a good pair bond to descend into? And somewhere around month 3, month 4, but
Yeah.
who knows?
The quickening or whatever, a lot of places. Yeah.
So, but the other thing I wanted to kind of introduce here is like, I think what's really at the heart of this conversation is like, what is a whole human being? What is an adult of our species, Homo sapiens? And what does that mean in terms of how we comport ourselves and how we arrange our societies and how we share resources and how we make decisions and how we establish fairness and justice? Because everything that the three of us grew up in, I don't know about your parents. I'm sure they're fine, but they probably weren't initiated adults when they inseminated you into existence or birthed you. Like they probably were not welcomed into a whole intact society, had to push themselves through several rites of passage where there was a possibility of failure where you wouldn't make it. And so I know, I'll just speak for myself. My parents didn't do that. They were kids. They were kids when they had me. They're still kids. I mean, my mom's a little further along than she was because she's been doing inner work.
Mm.
But we're not talking about, like, I didn't grow up in an adult society. No adult would set this thing up where like 3/4 of us are paycheck to paycheck and have one or more chronic conditions. Like, no, this is a young adolescent society at best. And so I think if we can get to this an understanding of like what a whole human is, and the desire to nurture a whole human, like, they say it takes a village, the same way like the desire to create a garden is to nurture the whole plant life. That's why certain species do well together. They need different light, water, all that kind of stuff. And so like that desire to nurture the wholeness of something, I think is really what's at stake. And I think that's, why we're spending so much time in the weeds here, is like, how do we make this work? Because it ain't working. Like, we are in these creedal times where we're watching this kind of modernist paradigm just eat itself alive. Like what are we going to create in its place? And I think that's why we need to like look at like, what is matriarchy? What is patriarchy? What is dominator? What is care-centered? What do these things actually mean, and how do we do it?
Yeah.
Well, and I think it was in the last episode I brought in Shakti leadership, and that was a really helpful exploration for me. I think you're calling it values, and that they might call it energy, masculine, feminine, sort of a weak English translation of Shiva and Shakti. But it was helpful because I grew up in a pretty traditional boomer, patriarchal household. I would say benevolent patriarchy. And doing a lot of, boy stuff, saying that cheekily, camping and fishing and all that. And dad was an academic, so that was an interesting twist on it. But in a lot of ways, it was the sort of standard setup. He was the primary breadwinner. She cooked dinner every night. He came home and had a glass of bourbon, and felt more raised by her, I'd say on the day-to-day basis. And for whether there's a correlation or not, when I started studying Shakti leadership, Neelima has this like little one-page assessment of where you are on the scale, and it was like 27 feminine energy to, I don't even know, like 9 or 6 or masculine or something.
Yeah.
And in that universe, and I brought this up last time, and we looked at the polarity map because it addresses that, hey, there's positive, negative, traits to both energies. And in that model, the point was to be balanced, right? To say, look, there are masculine, so-called masculine traits that are noble and worthwhile. There are so-called feminine traits that are noble and worthwhile, and the point is to balance them. And something else I believe was in that work is this idea that the masculine is in many ways here to be the container, to be the sort of sturdy boundary, whereas the feminine or the Shakti energy is the creative impulse. So it's more chaotic, but it needs structure. It needs like something to sort of, push against in order to actually take form. And I think, I don't know, I mentioned that to some women in particular, and it can be easily interpreted as like oppressive, right? It's like, oh, okay,
Sure.
you're compressing me, you're holding me in. Um, and that's a worthwhile discussion to have. Uh,
Yeah.
but it reminds me, and I think both of you are speaking to that in different way. It goes back to even your sandwich, Brendan. You know, maybe that is.
Yeah, yeah. You just made it a delicious bonbon. For me, these all turn into food metaphors.
Well, there you go. But I'm curious, Brandon, how that weaves in with what you're saying around values. And yeah,
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I agree with the kind of Shakti leadership uh, kind of framing of there being a set of characteristics or traits that at least this society ascribes to masculine or feminine. But like in those Hindu philosophical terms, they're like not at all. They've got 1,000 gods. We all have them. We can all develop them. We all have weaknesses. We all have, a growth path given our karma and all that. And there's similar stuff in kind of Western psychology, org development, where they like look at, whether it's Enneagram or Myers-Briggs, like the goal of maturity, like moving into kind of sovereign wholeness, is to have them both balanced. Like as you take the Myers-Briggs over time, like your wings are supposed to get less and less, and you're supposed to get pretty much kind of right down the center if you're doing your work. We don't live in that culture, though. Most people are not doing their work. And so I think this is where we get into this place of trying to take the current expression of men and women and grow them up. And this is where I think it's really relevant to this patriarchy, matriarchy conversation, is like when our fundamental wholeness was desecrated is different for boys than girls. You're familiar with Carol Gilligan, developmental moral psychologist, or not moral, but developmental psychologist, studied with Eric Erikson at Harvard a long time ago. But I'll briefly summarize kind of her work which I'm probably not going to do well, but I'll do my best because it's very relevant to how men and boys and girls and women show up in this world. So, she grew up, I think, in the 50s, 60s. She's like, why are women so messed up? Like they're neurotic and they're depressed and they're popping diet pills and they're, turning on each other and being catty. And like, she's like, and there's this point, like, because like, we have, they say like sugar and spice and everything nice. And then it turns like into Mean Girls, like almost overnight. Like what the heck is happening here? Where did this pathology arise? So she's studying, she's interviewing girls, all these different ages. And she realizes, oh wait, I don't have a control. So I can, go to another culture to do the same thing, or I just, because I'm resource constrained, I'll just study boys and see what we can learn. And basically what she found out was that at a very young age, boys have their bodies, emotions, dreams, creativity, sensuality shamed out of them at like age 4 to 6. Girls get that like age 8 to 13. And what we know from neuroscience and cognitive psychology is that like you need emotions to form hypotheses, to make memories, to posit good questions, hypothesis. I mean, like you need this felt experience to be like, nah, this is messed up. Like, let's try it the other way, or like, what if? And so when they say that like girls develop faster than boys, or that boys are bad, well, like we've been trying to live the world through this like tiny little part of our psycho spiritual emotional self, and so we're still getting all the data, but we're only registering it as like rage and lust. And so what the fuck do you expect we're going to do in high school? We're going to like beat the shit out of each other, try to sleep as many and the hottest women as possible, try to get as much power and wealth and then our culture doesn't know any of this because they're not adults. They're saying, okay, boys bad, girls bad, or girls good. Boys be like girls. Girls stay away from boys. All right, girls, wear clothes. Boys, don't rape and don't do bad touch. Like, and so we've got this like very litigious container around these like deep psychological wounds that now we then project and say this is what men and women are, and like when men are in charge they're going to be this way, and women are in charge they're going to be that way.
Yeah.
We really have to look at the development and the epigenetic trauma, like generation after generation after generation, all the self-policing among men and boys and the women and girls, and how that just like creates this super toxic. And then we expect them to fall in love and then co-parent, and then and, I mean, it's crazy making. It's absolutely bonkers. You couldn't set up a worse set of conditions to try to like build a healthy society.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. Well, especially 1950s. I just have the cliche of that being an era of such. Now, granted, I wasn't alive then, so I see it mostly through documentaries, nonfiction, and fiction books, and whatever. Um, but I didn't grow up in that world at all. Like I grew up in a feminist feminist society, like abjectly across the board. Now, granted, I also am a second generation. I was born into a second generation single parent mother household. Um, Creativity or emotions were never remotely subjugated. But also, I'm low, as I've talked about in the show, I'm low in politeness, I think by nature, and I came from multiple generations of nonconformists. So if someone tells me that's not what boys do, I know what, but I'm a boy.
Mhm.
So it doesn't matter what you say. So that's the thing. I don't know. See, to me, that's almost like that is maybe a good idea of a feminist or matriarchal harm. Because we have to figure out if we're going to smash the matriarchy, what's our steelman case for why we should smash the matriarchy is probably our best question to, if we look at it as values, but it is values coordinated to gender, and whether it's accurately coordinated to gender or not is always the excellent question. Because like associations by gender are like, oh my gosh, what a quagmire we've spent episodes and episodes in. Um, but yeah, I just didn't grow up anywhere. And I moved 11 times. I lived in, yeah, mostly in the United States, mind you, but lived in six, seven states. Raleigh, North Carolina is probably the closest, like, kind of like subjugated society I've ever been, or sublimated society I've ever been in. Um, so I'm like, that's wild for the 50s, but like, I don't even know what in the world they're talking about. And I think what's interesting here, actually, you pointed this out for the rites of passage, is maybe that's a patriarchal positive slash negative, is because it tends towards maybe a libertarian bent, meaning uh, individual flourishing is decided by the individual. So, in both of my parents' case, for example, they're great examples of it. Both my father and my mother emancipated themselves. One just literally left. The other one actually did so through like state documentation as well as. So they both left the house when they were 16 years old. So they set up their own rite of passage, probably a little on the late side. I did that when I was 8 years old, but then God grabbed a hold of me when I was 12 and kind of did it for me then. And then, yeah, so they literally liberated themselves. Whereas maybe in the matriarchal system, because we've seen this too with like oppression in order to maintain some manner of moral conformity, right? I mean, women run HR so women essentially in our culture dominate, like hugely dominate what are considered like corporate morality. So corporate
Mhm.
morality for the past 20 years is female. It's a great test. It's a great test case. So like, how has that gone? And how has that like um, operationalized corporate morality being used in society? So maybe that's a good little interesting ways. And that whereas perhaps the matriarchal version would be like, no, you have to go through it the way that we say, as that we've decided as a collective, you go through it this way. Now, granted, this is also a United States thing, and we are rebellious by nature or whatever. And I'm from Irish extraction, so anti-authority, anti-colonialism. I married someone who's Indian, so anti-colonialism, anti-authority. We are the United States. I mean, kicking really the English in a lot of ways are like are almost they're like a living metaphor, a cultural metaphor for like any oppression, anything. You know what I mean? In some ways, I think of like, people use fascist. They don't mean fascist at all. They have no idea what they're talking about. They're just using a word that they've heard. But like, I feel like that English kind of sits as our like spiritual fascist, living, at least
Mhm.
for me, living in this culture. So I think that's the fascinating thing is like, we don't live in that world hardly at all anymore. The
Mhm.
1950s could not be, especially in the way things rapidly change now, where probably every 2 to 6 years, we're actually in like a wildly different paradigm socially. So that's
And
sort
yet,
of fascinating.
Brendan, we both have access to the next generation in our houses,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah, yeah.
I'm 2 days ago, my stepdaughter, I don't even know where, I can't remember where it came from. We weren't really on this subject in any sort of way, like academically, by any stretch. and she just volunteered that girls, so she's 11, she's going into the sixth grade, and she
That's a huge year.
just volunteered that girls just tear each other apart.
Mm. Well,
And she was really
Yeah.
sad about it. She was just like,
Yes.
what is the deal? And I
Yeah.
can't, she said something about boys. I don't remember what it was, but maybe
Yeah. Yeah.
slightly more.
Yeah. Well, because again, we do live in a matriarchy. We have, even though universally across all moral systems, gossip is a verboten. Violence is not verboten in most moral systems on the planet. It's regulated violence. That there are purposes for violence, and there are many ill purposes for violence. So it's a regulated action. Whereas gossip, anytime it's mentioned, especially in like Confucianism, which is a great collectivist, or Ubuntu, gossip is there is no good gossip. There's no such thing. So I was thinking about that when you were talking about that, Brandon. I was like, oh, that's interesting. There is maybe like a good reason to smash the matriarchy and good reason to smash the patriarchy, which is toxic use of violence in patriarchy and toxic use of gossip. But we live in a culture where gossip is largely celebrated. Violence
mhm.
is violence is celebrated, but celebrated in corners. Meaning there are dark corners of the internet and dark subcultures where people are all about it. But we tend to then go put those in boxes. You can get in a ring and you have all these rules, and that's how you do violence. Other than that, like even if you attacks, if someone threatens to kill everybody in a subway car and you use violence against that person, you're like, that was bad. Just because they said they were going to murder everyone in there doesn't mean you should use violence against them. Whereas, like, well, in most ethical scenarios, you're like, that's actually the time that it should be at least on the table because they're going to commit harm to the collective. And that might even tie in also to your daughter's schematic too, because we don't gossip does not get punished, especially in the educational system. It doesn't get punished the way violence is. But if somebody ends up punching someone in the face, you're like, you're out of school. I've been wrangling with my literally talking to the principal of I was like, you seem to regulate boys' negative behavior far more stringently, and you condemn especially anger. People treat anger as this sort of like dark emotion or whatever, which is like I mean, to me, that's phenomenally toxic, right? We don't need to, we don't need to moralize any of the emotions. Let's let them all, they're all exist. Whereas girls' negative emotions are generally treated with like, oh, you feel hurt, and then they bring you. This is just the policy at their school. They then bring you into the other room. They sometimes kind of let you sit in silence and kind of get through it when people are kind of gossiping about you or talking bad to you or trying to hurt you with their words and their exclusion from the collective. That becomes like the big part is like you move like the Borg or whatever. Then that is sort of treated gently, and we want to talk to you about it. Maybe we bring you in it and sort of resolve it. But hitting is just no, like you're done, you're out. So it's a again, this speaks to I think a further from 50s, at least in my case, late 70s, 80s to now 2026. We're seeing like in some ways it's sort of the further subjugation from the 50s you're talking about into really exclusion, that your toxicity means you're out. Our toxicity means, oh, sometimes that can hurt people, so we've got to navigate it. So there's an odd protection over a
Yeah.
moral, like over a moral violation in some ways too. So it's an invention of a brand new moral system. But again, like you said, we're not being supervised by adults.
No, no, no. And I think this is where it's like a good place to start to explore like shadow and evil and kind
Yeah.
of because I mean this is really what all conversations are about. It's like how do we
Yes.
deal with
Oh,
the
for sure.
problem of evil, right? Because it's
Yep.
there. I got it. You two guys got it. Your wives got it. Your kids got it. You know,
Yeah.
everyone you've ever known and loved and hated has got it. Um, and so like you know we, at least in the United States, are in a very like death denying culture, an evil denying culture. You know, the primary kind of moral values are like Judeo Christian, and like it's basically just like what would Jesus do or pray on it. There's no real like um, understanding of sin in the Judeo Christian tradition that allows you to like metabolize it and move through it and look at where it came from and the wounds and the patterns and you know the growth opportunity of transforming it and all that kind of stuff. And that's what intact cultures that haven't been colonized, but they have in spades. Like when bad stuff happens, they have rituals for dealing with it, because occasionally bad stuff does happen. Consent lines get crossed. There's an unjust death in a border skirmish, and it's a collective trauma, and it gets moved through, usually through ritual, drumming, singing, dancing, shaking, uh, the use of hallucinogens, sweating, like, so the whole community can metabolize the pain and get back to the deep love and care that's underneath it, what was lost, and all that. And they also, to your point, Brendan, they also honor and celebrate anger. Like, yes, you're angry. That means like there's something you love is at stake. Yes, let's do more of this.
It's an active. It's just an activating emotion. Yeah, let's do something.
Like, yeah. And like, Andy and I know this through men's work. Like, when anger comes up, it's like, yes, okay, we've got to process these for moving through this stuff. And usually on the other side of that is like this deep repatriation of a part of self that, we had to cleave off as young boys to survive. Like, oh, I love this, creativity piece. And that's what I had to like put away at age 6 or age 9 or whatever it was.
So actually, sorry, let me stop, because that's a really good thing. Like, why would anyone put it away? Who made anyone put it away? That's my question. Because I read that a lot, and it feels like it is some people's lived experience. It's not mine. So then, and I grew up in, again, my mom got married, and absolutely my stepfather was a patriarch. And listen, I love him to death, and I understand, like, it took me till my 20s to understand him. I didn't call myself a man until I was 40 years old. Never used the word for myself. So it speaks a lot to what you said. But like, how does anyone actually make you do it? As opposed to just try to shame you or whatever. But shame's only as powerful as you as an individual let it be. In terms of the paradigm you're speaking of. I mean, who does it, and how do they do it, and how do they make them do it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll share about my own kind of wounds, because I mean, that's, it's just what I experienced. So like, I distinctly remember like age 6, wanting to buy a Culture Club 45. On, MTV had just come out. It was like, and my dad said, "Sure, just promise me you're not gay." And I'm like, what does that mean? But I just I felt the judgment, and I was like, oh, like I can't put this on, or if I do, like, what is gay? Like, I didn't know even who Boy George was.
That's like a hard way to introduce the concept. Yeah.
And so like, I took on all this, like, oh, my sense of belonging and safety in my home is dependent on my dad's opinion about who I am. And so that, and I'm not saying it's true. It's just
the
meaning I made up about it.
Yeah.
So I looked, instead of to myself, my own lived experience, my own internal compass, I looked at him, and what was he? He was militaristic. He was mostly emotionless, unless there were some booze involved where he could laugh.
Sure. Yeah.
He didn't engage in the arts, didn't read. He made fun of races, genders, homosexuals, Islamic, Jews. And so like, it was like, I patterned my own self-image off this guy who had his own wholeness cleaved from him as a young boy. And then there's all these other like incidents along the way where it's like, don't do that, guys, don't do that. Don't do that, guys, don't do that. It's like, rub some dirt on it. Keep your head down,
walk it off, shake it off
with 2 hands, do the thing, and do it good. And if you want to take an art class, maybe when you're retired. Like, it was like, all this stuff of like emotions, creativity, pleasure, being silly, all that stuff is like, no, you are in this man box. You're going to be a captain of industry. Do what I say. And that was And so that's what I experienced.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. That's fast. Well, I grew up with 2 artists. Like, my mom was an actress and my dad is a filmmaker and environmental artist or whatever. So I grew up with that stuff around. But like, this is helpful. I'm going to say this to all the bastards out there. Maybe you don't. I feel like bastards don't get enough attention nowadays. We just don't really use the word, right? Progeny dynamics aren't really. But to all the bastards out there, it's actually really helpful, folks. I want you to love yourself for a moment, just a moment, in that. You're born already knowing your primary caregivers don't know what they're doing. Like whether you know what marriage is or not, you just know when you come out and then there's like, you're like, wait, this is my stand-in for maleness of God. Here's my stand-in for femaleness of God. And they're just like intermittent and they don't really even get along. And they, they, they split asunder even before I like got to like speed him on the delivery room floor. Um, is that it's really, in some ways, it's really helpful because then you're not like, oh, adults know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So in that way, like it's helpful to hear because I didn't even know stuff like that happened anymore. You're like, who does that? Come on. I was like, that's like, I was thinking of the DiCaprio, De Niro movie or whatever. You're like, oh my, that hasn't happened since the 1950s. Who says stuff like that? But let's also look though too, as the positive aspects of him saying, uh, promise me you're not be gay. I can't defend the particular sentence construction there. But there is something that speaks to the positive qualities of fatherhood in that moment, which is like being gay, living gay is associated, even in modern society, with increased rates of domestic violence, meaning participating in or receiving sexually transmitted diseases, whatever, hemorrhoid surgeries, also potentially danger from outside of yourself. In terms of any whatever, if there's any like genuinely homophobic enclaves left in the West, there's a few, there's not many. Meaning, then it's again the thing Andy you were talking about the bonbon. Uh, there's like the shell instinct, which is like, hey, like don't go down any path that's gonna get like you're gonna get your ass kicked by any way, shape, or form. And there's even this is even the sad part because again, I don't really. I have so many edits on the way he said it to you, but it is the attempt to place the collectivist interest, which is the moral interest, which is above all of us. Meaning it's the ultimate collectivist thing that he did, which is he said he pointed to universal morality, which would either condemn or treat homosexuality neutral, and saying the most dangerous form of safety, or the most dangerous form of lack of safety, is moral or cosmic or eternal, even more so than temporal. So he might have his little temporal concerns, and honestly, he might even just be like, "I don't get it. It seems weird," or whatever. You know what I mean? That might be the intuitive or the felt portion of his brain. But I was like, we can even look at toxic patriarchy. And then if we flip that and said, okay, what if we looked at patriarchy, even the stuff we don't like, we think is gross, and put the matriarchy rose-colored glasses on about it? You're like, you can see, if you steel man that, you can actually see a desire to protect his son
Mhm.
cosmically. So in
Oh yeah,
some way,
totally.
you know what I mean? Which is, I
Totally.
mean, it's a fast. Listen, I'm sure you've unpacked this as well. But I was like, oh, it's a good way where we can kind of steel man, straw man some of those same instincts, even in something where you're like, I can't believe he said that. Really? Oh boy. Okay.
Well, it's fascinating to see how protectionism shows up, and my
Yeah.
case is unique in the sense that I got married 3 years ago, so I'm a little late to the party. Um,
Welcome anyway.
I understand in terms of being a stepfather. And maybe one generalization that it seems logical is women have who carry a child have a bit more investment, direct bodily investment, and may tend to be more protective of that. Whereas I think my mom was even saying this: men comes out and men are like, "Oh, it's a soccer ball. I'm going to play with it."
Yeah, throw you up in the air and catch you, and yeah,
But I see that, and Brandon, this has come up on some of our episodes, right, where we
yeah,
talked about just helicopter parenting and
yeah.
our times really the argument is usually, well, times are different. The world is more dangerous, et cetera, et cetera.
It's so
I
much.
mean,
It is so much safer.
I'm
It's
here in an
hilarious. Yeah,
urban environment where I grew up
yeah.
in it. I've talked to you also about this, Brandon, and I've seen you post about it, this like wildness,
Mm,
and
hmm.
I think you often speak at it through the male lens, but I've also seen like women posts on your posts that are like, yeah, but don't women get to be wild too? So it feels like there's like a bit of a
Yeah.
yearning, like, oh my God, we've like squished ourselves all into this, you know, and I judge, probably not that accurately, but I judge that women maybe even more materialistic because they're often the ones setting up the house in this 21st century culture where we need lots of stuff and we need lots of
Yeah, yeah.
supplies and we need, whatever. Um,
Mhm.
and so this connection to materialism. So I
Mm.
don't know, I just blurred out like three categories, but go.
That's fascinating. Well, we have to loop back on one thing. Okay, because I am the sole representative of what people would term the Judeo-Christian tradition. The Judeo-Christian tradition is actually specifically built on patterned uh, word for word rituals of restoration post sin. I mean, it's the most sin one of the more sin obsessed sort of religious systems, meaning confession and repentance, especially in a Christian context, having grown up in that. If one errs, and sin in Christianity is anything that's not a bullseye. So hamartia means to miss the mark. So if it hits the target, still sin. It involves divine repentance, meaning divine forgiveness, and turning. You have to turn around, and it involves confession to other humans, usually first in either an intimate, like one-on-one, or a small group. And then from that, depending on who your harm has affected beyond yourself, because first and foremost, anything that is genuinely wrong is not about hurting the community, first and foremost, because that's just utilitarianism. That's not moral at all. That's just like consequence, right? Or more, that's like violating of mores, not morals, if that makes sense. Then, if it's affected more people, you then have the same thing of you publicly repent of that way in which you have erred to the entire collective, at which point you are to be entirely restored. And Judaically, I mean, holy cow, is there a more like abjectly specific rituals of purification and restoration system left in, at least in terms of documented capture? We have fragments of it from many other cultures, right? Code of Hammurabi has some similar, but it literally is like, when you've done this thing, it involves this many pigeons brought to this many people, so this much blood needs to be shed, and if you do this, then there is a banishment, and if you do this, then there's a multi-stage, you keep checking in until your skin has cleared. And I mean, like, it's the most, this is the fascinating thing, is I think we're actually, we have this almost like 50s fantasy that we still live in a Judeo-Christian puritanical culture, but we've been living, at least in our age, we've been living in a postmodern culture our entire lives. It dominates everything, which means there is no, we've literally taken off as a broad culture, mind you. Of course, there's all sorts of subcultures, but as a broad culture, there is no shadow and light. There is
No.
no good and evil.
No.
And it really becomes, this is the sad thing, in the hyper individualistic toxicity of patriarchy, it becomes then whatever does or doesn't serve me, which means if I shadow all day long, but look at how I profit from it,
Hmm.
you're like, well, how could there be any consequence? Which again gets us back to that balance, that element we were talking about earlier, which is like, if it's not a both and, you look how you just go, well, I'm doing what everyone else is doing. I'm a collectivist, so I can't be wrong. Or you're saying, well, I'm doing what profits me. What can't be wrong? And what a quagmire we're in. I feel like we're all
Yeah.
trying to develop some like a new semi-secular, deeply sort of syncretistic religious like everyone's literally just being like, whoa, we're in
Yeah.
such a whoa moment, which is kind of fun though, because you're in the primordial chaos of it all.
I know. I mean, like I think I've shared this with Andy a couple times, but like, during the 80s and 90s, I was bored. I was like, it was like peak consumer capitalism or consumer culture, and like it's just like new toys and new. I mean, granted, great music. I love the music of the 80s and 90s,
Yeah, yeah.
but like to me, it always felt like the real exciting things had already happened. Like we were in this kind of like
Yes. Yeah,
you
yeah.
know
Oh, for sure.
Bretton Woods, Pax Americana, stability, like milk toast, uh, bland suburban inanity. It was like it was
Yeah,
nuts.
yeah, yeah.
But now, like we're in this beautiful place. We have
Classic white, classic white.
but now we're in this beautiful place where like postmodernism is kind of like ripped through all these institutions,
Yeah.
and now uh, the far right's kind of like taken out all the safety net, like any concern for the broader society, like all that stuff is like going away. And so
Well,
you
hold
have
on. Wait. Didn't you just do the same thing again, though? Aren't you
what's
doing
that?
the same thing you did with patriarchy, matriarchy, where you're saying like, so the far right comes in and has taken away any concern for all stability and concern for everybody else? Isn't that aren't you? You're almost turning them just like patriarchy into the shat. So this is the danger, right?
Well,
Because you know what I
yeah,
mean?
I was trying to equivocate kind of like the left's postmodern kind of tearing down the ideas and the institutions, and the right kind of defunding it at the same
Yeah.
time. So it's like they're both like attacking at the foundation of whatever the last century was. And I think
Well,
that's
go ahead.
I think that's created this kind of like liberation. Like everyone's like, oh, so my taxes are funding genocide and ethnic cleansing. My job is meaningless. The more bad I do in the world, and the more cutthroat and toxic I am, the more money I get to bring home to my kin. And
Yeah.
so like it's really upside down world in terms of trying to structure a coherent cosmos. So
Yeah.
we're in this like this milieu of kind of destruction and creation, and like now I'm super excited to be alive. I'm like, hell
Yes.
yes, I'm so glad I
Yes.
was born in the 80s and 90s, because
Yes.
now we get to play. I mean, like
Yeah.
now we really get to play like the deeper ideas, like lay the foundation of what might be a society where all
Yeah.
life flourishes and there's even more peace than we've ever known. Um, and so to that end, like I think, books like Alicia Davis Before War and Ursa Ursula K. Le Guin's Always Coming Home. I want to introduce another one too. I think that's like could be a good foundation here for reconciling and elevating the beauty of masculinity, femininity of women and men. And that's Bill Plotkin's book, kind of nature-based developmental psychology, Nature and the Human Soul. The reason I bring that up is because he talks about these like two wheels of development. In our current society, we've got this egocentric wheel where it's like all about conforming, supplicating, what does he say, like being resigned, and like there's like rebellion, and then there's like kind of coming back into like just essentially selling your soul and then dying with regret, and like on
Yeah.
a golf course drunk while your kids don't like you anymore and you never see your grandkids and all that.
Yeah.
So he's like you got this egocentric wheel that's spinning heavily right now. That's like the default. But the purpose path, the thing that Andy and I have talked about, as well as some of the MKP stuff, ejects you off of that wheel entirely. And so you're essentially a stranger in a strange land. Like once you get the
Yeah.
beauty and fullness of your whole soul, you're like, none of this shit. Like I don't want any part of it. And so there's the soul-centric or eco-centric wheel development that then moves you through some other stages into artisan, master, elder, and then kind of crone or sage or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so if we like, I almost don't care about culture conversations or anything that is on that egocentric wheel. Like only thing I'm caring about is like how do we get people out of it? Like how do we get them onto the other wheel to become whole adults in a whole community where the fullness of their souls, all the cleaved off parts from childhood get rematriated, get repatriated into like the fullness of an adult, of a sovereign, of an elder, of a leader. And so like I would much rather like explore the contours of that and how do we optimize the masculine and feminine in this soul centric capacity versus like just dealing with what's so, because like this thing is crumbling faster. We can debate it, but it's like, I mean, just like literally watching a castle fall in slow motion.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas this other thing is like, all right, what can we create based on all these sweet blocks that we can then pull into the new world?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I think that's my paranoia of the moment is watching how many of the worst blocks people are pulling over into the soul thing. Literally just taking the word, like the whole concept of authentic self. Could not despise it more. Like it's the most egocentric. It basically takes the ego center, the little like the fundamental portion, and brings it over to the soul side and says like, so then you're just restoring yourself as the center of the universe, and then be like, now let's build around that. But let me ask though, in terms of how do they, okay, because I did grow up in a Judeo-Christian influenced culture in this non 1950s, not really patriarchal at all, almost anti-patriarchal culture. Um, and the Christian schema does not use soul as an eternal thing. So that it's not an eternal, there's no such thing as an eternal outside. Your soul is, I would say, now that we have cell phones, it's your cell phone battery. And when you're running GPS, your battery burns down. When the soul is done, that's all it means. It's like energy, life force. There is no body and soul separation, right? That was like a certainly not a Judaic tradition whatsoever. And that was like an early, what sort of called the Gnostic heresies, which is like some people have special magical knowledge, and you know, the body, sort of this idea that the body is evil. It's actually a little more Buddhist in a way, where like the ultimate expression of self is to have no self, really, is to
Mhm.
have no attachment to any of really anything, no love, not to community, not to anything. Now,
Mhm.
on the way there, you're supposed to be kind of shedding, you kind of shed the quote unquote bad, whatever, putting it very simply and Westernly, but like shed all the bad stuff first, then shed all the good stuff. There is no bad, there is no good, there is no self, there is no stuff, there is no blah, blah, blah. And then maybe, you know, at what point you can continue to ascend and you have the ability, you're below the gods and below the demons in Buddhism, but they don't ascend as fast as you do in the Buddhist construct. Um, so that how did they use, like, do they use soul in a way that is going to require, just like all this does, like a ton of explanation, meaning, or do they mean it in this sort of, did they mean it in this sort of Buddhist or even like New Thought sense, or even Greek? Kind of the Greeks were kind of into this sort of idea, or do they mean it in the if we are in any way and influenced by Judeo-Christian culture sense?
Um, I, I'll speak briefly to the Buddhist
Yeah,
piece because I think there's some good lessons here for the gendered expressions too.
yeah,
So as I understand, Buddhism is a reformation on some of the kind of more ritual, deity-oriented, thou-oriented Hindu
Hindu stuff.
philosophy
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and spirituality. And if you understand the Eightfold Path and Four Noble Truths, like it is, there's ethical precepts. Like there's a lot of like stuff in this world to get right before you can go up.
yeah,
Um, and put it in a kind of Western psychological frame. You have to have an ego healthy enough to transcend. If your ego is messed up, that's where the work is. And that's where most of Western society is. Now, the frame that um, is not really present in Buddhism, but is present in Hinduism, where you have the Atman and the Para Atman, like the unique divinity that like the divine that's flowing through the prism of you, like your work in the world, your soul, your dharma.
yeah,
That its only purpose is to teach you how to be a human being in this life. So this marriage of soul and ego as a coherent sovereign adult who can then like you kind of master this level of the video game. Like you need
yeah,
ego and soul to marry. Like you have to have a code, have a abstract sense of self that you're tacking to. You've got a community, elders, texts, prayers, rituals. All this is trying to like help you be like a good human. Now, once you reach that, that's when you kind of move into the next ashram or stage, and that's it's like okay, I've got the householder thing done. Now I can ascend. And Buddhism is like, well, just forget the whole householder thing. Just like, just ascend.
yeah.
Um,
Look, just show me the final aim. Yeah, show me the
yeah,
stars.
just show me
Don't
the
show me the
final aim.
clouds. Yeah,
And yet, for most folks in this world, we have this highly sensory self. It's prone to a static experience. It's prone to deep emotional despair, joy, and elation.
yeah,
Um, Experiencing that in its fullness uh, is a gift, I think, across gender, but specifically like in male bodies. Like once men kind of once these things start to come online, experiencing the ecstasy, the dreams, the sensuality, the creativity, the tenderness, the elation, the mystery, the wonder, the awe, all this stuff that U.S. or Western culture kind of says, don't like just be successful, be hot, and that's about it. And life will work out for you. But like once that comes back online, you start to say, oh, wow, look at all of my friends. They all have that in there too. Like, look at all these women. They probably have much more going on than like society is allowing them to express and experience. So my hope is that folks start to do their inner work and yes, be aware of the narcissistic dangers of being your authentic self, but like do that within a community of other folks who care about you and can hold up a mirror to like how you're showing up. Like, I know you're trying this on, but it's landing really authentic or inauthentically. Or like, so like
Right. Or depending on the content of the soul, it's actually highly authentic,
yeah.
meaning that would have to assume in any way that, let's say, whatever, especially in a pantheistic or like Buddhist sense or whatever, the God light that's flowing through you, like they might be like, oh, and it's a pure and good light. We have no cause to assume that. They might assume that it literally might be the God light that's shining through you might literally be the worst part of yourself. And we have
Totally.
that. I mean, which is eventually why, obviously, it becomes non-theistic in its final ascended form. It kind of eventually even lets go of all. It's like, let go of that. Now, for a lot of people, that's going to be last or whatever. Oh, but real quick though, but like, what is the soul then in the paradigm of the thing that you were talking about, where you've got kind of your ego, consumption,
Mhm.
narcissism, but what is this? Is the soul a separate? It's a separate disembodied self
Mm,
that then joins the body and then can depart the body.
I mean,
Is it like a Pixar soul in rough approximation?
I mean, my understanding is that um, it's always there, and it kind of move in and out of the body. Um,
Okay,
but it's not like there's no like vampires or or werewolves who like lacking soul or just like it's always there. It's like, God, I really wish I had the opening to come back in, kind of thing.
got it. But it is
Um,
that's what I mean. Disembodied. So like Christianity
yeah,
or Judaism, Islam, like none of them believe there's no disembodied. Well, Islam has a little, whatever,
yeah,
but there's no disembodied soul concept. Meaning like it's one of those things when people use soul all the time, and you can just mean it for like James Brown music. And you're like, that actually is more of a, you know what I mean? It's one of those words that has multiple definitions. And I think, especially when you're talking about what we're talking about, is literally the most fundamental element.
hmm
But we're talking about
yeah,
completely different things. Meaning, like, if it's a thing that comes in and out of you, then it's not at all compact. Like, this is one of those semantic things. Like, you think you're having a conversation with, let's say, someone who is in the Judeo-Christian tradition. And then eventually you're like, oh, you're talking about something I do not believe exists. Like there would be like that there would even be like the attachment to the idea, even within your framework, the attachment to the idea that the community has anything wise to tell you also has
hmm
to be let go of. The idea that you have a disembodied soul would have to be let go of. You know what I mean? Like you, at least from a Judeo-Christian through Greek dialogos sort of lens, is like, oh, okay, well, all of that has to be questioned. Meaning, and of course, to kill every Buddha you encounter it already kind of starts to address that
hmm
as well. But I do think it's a fascinating thing because people have this weird, I actually think in our culture, we have a weird polyglot thing of it. Where like, and nobody, when people say soul, I'm going to say 90% of the people have no idea what they're talking about. Like they don't even know what they're
yeah,
trying to express. I mean, so I think
yeah.
it was good to kind of like nail that down to like, okay, that's very much like a Hindu, not even, yeah, it's sort of pseudo dharmic, but not Taoist, like more of a,
Well,
yeah,
like
more of
in
a
the
Buddhist
Hindu
view.
sense, like, and again, that's just one. Like Hinduism is so rich. There's like, I mean, it's like a whole society that of schools of thought that disagree with one another. But this is just
Yes, yeah,
one in the
yeah.
kind of like the tantric integral sense that like this is a part that is valid, it needs to be followed. Like what you know Krishna said to Arjuna, like to follow your own dharma and fail, it's better than to try to follow someone else's. So it acknowledges that like there's something unique within you, and like
Mhm.
from the First Nations Earth based stuff, they talk about that too. It's like it's through the dreams, through the ceremony, like you get the names, the vision, like this is your gift to the people. You have to do that or you will die. Like literally, like
Yeah.
God will snuff you out like that. And there's in the Gnostic Gospels, there's similar words from Jesus, like bring forth what is within you, and what is within you will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what is within you will destroy you. So like if you don't tend to the soul, if you don't center it and build your ego and your community around it, like it's literally going to lead to your destruction. But if you do, it's going to lead to your prosperity and your fullness, and then your salvation, like your mode of transcendence into the non-dual, essentially. So almost all faiths have that. You could find it. You could find it in Sufism. You could find it in Kabbalah. You could find it in Gnostic. Like they've got some aspect of like this soul exists. It's special, and it's your key to heaven, basically. If you embody it, if you express it, if you bring it forth.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, yeah.
There's
So
even a
that's
bridge there
directly
to
yeah. Go ahead. No, go, buddy.
modern psychology, right? Where Gabor says we often trade our authenticity for belonging.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, Brendan, I don't know that we've come up with a great answer for like why do we trade these things off? Why do we give these up? Why do we feel forced? Why does society demand this? And I don't know that there was this, I heard that phrase resonates a lot, and I start seeing it in a
Yeah.
lot of places.
Yeah. Well, that might get us to, because we do have to bring it in for landing. Like, what's the steelman of why we should smash the matriarchy? And I actually think belonging is a great start, because belonging is one of the most toxic, like, in order to adhere to that which the collective says, has been the vehicle. It's actually the sort of, it's actually interesting. It's both in like mother of nation and fatherland. People use both to do the exact same thing, which is we all say this is how it is. And it usually means that, like, let's say in Germany for the fatherland, right? That those Jews are no longer ensouled persons. They're essentially savage beasts. So you unensoul, like in our culture, we pretend that the unborn don't have souls, and so you can kill them all you want. Or maybe the Israelis even do it to some degree, that if you become our stated enemy and your declared desire is to kill us all with the help of sentient rocks and trees, as Hamas said, which I again, I don't understand why people don't talk about that every day. Sentient rocks and trees to kill Jews is one of the funniest things I've ever heard in my life. So belonging then, and we see this too in academia, where women overwhelmingly are like, if you speak against our collective mores, like violence should be used against you. Women are super into using violence for anybody who violates their specific sense of belonging. So it's not about integration for anybody, actually, for both matriarchy and patriarchy. So belonging might actually be a great gateway into how, like, why we would smash, like, why would we smash the matriarchy? Because I think it's the hard thing, because I think all three of us, maybe from the get-go, on maybe less so on patriarchy, we might not all agree, but like, we actually don't want to smash anything. So then the hardest or most relevant thing to do is go, okay, well, what's the best case as to why we would? Why would we exterminate matriarchy and make sure it never, ever gains a foothold? And belonging, which I would say belonging and empathy, the whole toxic empathy versus empathy thing, or the weaponization of empathy, I should say, which is just to feel as though you are another, which is profoundly different from compassion, which is perhaps the more classic modern, not postmodern thing, comparator, but it's not the same, because compassion is to suffer with. That means you remain yourself, and you enter into a bubble with someone else, and they suffer and you suffer with them, but you remain in some ways separated, right? And empathy would be to suffer as that person, either imaginatively, which means you're not doing it at all and you're actually only suffering alone, pretending to be someone else, because I'm an actor, so I know all about empathy and inhabitation. Or you're literally suffering as another person, in which case, I mean, some people could say that's great because that's an ego death, meaning you don't exist. But then you have to be careful how to process it, because if you're processing it as yourself, or if you're not actually processing as them, and then if you're processing as them, you don't have the clarity to be outside of the drowning, your friend who's drowning in some sort of way, which means you have to be outside. You have to be both inside the pool and outside the pool, which means I think they're both coordinated. But I think that belonging empathy thing might be the best reason to destroy matriarchy, because it says if you do not submit to the collective, the Borg, it's the Borg problem. Whereas,
Yeah.
like, I think patriarchy is the Mongols. Toxic patriarchy is the Mongol hordes, and the torturous and conquering a thing, and it unified the people. Listen, it created a people out of which there was no people. But but the female might be the Borg thing, which is like there must be conform or die sort of concept.
Yeah, I think that's the distinction there is around conformity versus belonging. The way I hold belonging, it's like it's at one sense that you're at home with someone, that you can be your full self with someone else or with
Yeah.
another group. Like, so I feel belonging with my men's circle. Feel belonging with Andy. I'm sure I can feel belonging with you too, Brandon. But
We'll get there eventually. Yeah. It's early days still.
like, I can be unfiltered and say stuff that would get me in trouble and all sorts of stuff. And whereas like conformity, and I've seen this done in male-centered environments and female-centered environments. Like that is deeply toxic to authenticity and belonging. Like you just can't. It's saying like you have to be this uh, in order to get whatever tokens are on the table, kind of thing.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that I think there's merit in that for trades, for life-threatening situations. Like, hey, I need all your heads on the swivel. Whatever sadness you got, fucking stuff it down. We'll deal after the battle. Like,
yeah.
there's merit in pushing things to the side for survival, for
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
a short-term thing. But then you have to like reintegrate and all that kind of stuff. But I just don't want to equivocate belonging and conformity. I think like belonging is a sacred, holy thing. When like you belong to yourself, you've done the parts work to repatriate, rematriate, all the stuff cleaved off as a child and youth, and that you can welcome someone else in all their mess and all their evolution and how they're putting themselves back together. Like you say, like we got you. Like if God made you, we got you. Like that is a beautiful thing. Very few places fully do that. More often they're doing what you're talking about, Brendan. It's like, do this, pay the tithe, act this way, tuck your shirt in, cut your hair, da 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 da,
Yeah.
and then you get the ticket to the golden kingdom.
Yeah. For me, that's come up in the past couple of years. Is like if you don't affirm a subjective gender identity over gender, I don't belong. I've literally. I mean, I can't. I told Andy about this, but I think this is fascinating for our discourse. Is like I tried to join an improv comedy troupe,
Mhm.
which is a yes and also anytime anyone tells you they have a wound. And now this speaks to a little bit what you were talking about. So I grew up like as a comedic person. I don't know. God made me this way. And so anytime someone tells you a wound, a fear on stage, pretty much your job is to poke that wound. So if someone
Mhm.
says, "Yeah, I've just got a problem with my dad," he just was so like he was just loud. He would get loud for no reason. Everybody who comes on that scene is going to be loud for no reason. Like your job as a community is to absolutely debride the wound, right? So if it's a
Uh-huh.
deep wound, that's what we have to do in burns, right? You have to like literally tear out all the flesh. It hurts like heck, but you better get to the baseline or you're going to rot underneath it, right? It's our co-healing ceremonial aspect. So that the fascinating thing to me is I have never seen a place that prioritizes belonging that does not enforce conformity. For me, outside of the church. And listen, I've been kicked out of 2 Christian schools, so it's not like it doesn't happen there. But
Mhm.
that's the whole thing is like you can be Hitler and you can belong in the Christian paradigm. And if you are repentant forgiven, that doesn't mean you don't get sentenced at the Hague and we don't hang you. Like
Mhm.
we still can kill you, but it doesn't mean you don't belong,
Yeah.
sort of thing. So in some ways, like obviously that's been like a safety net for me, and people don't operationalize it that way, which is why they've kicked me out as well. But so I don't. I've never seen it. Now maybe it's a beautiful ideal, and maybe it may exist somewhere or whatever. But like, and Andy, likewise, like we saw, I think even more so with you because I was starting to feel it. I was like, what's going on? Like, I don't. This collectivist response in the 2020s was like, yeah, but if you don't put a mask on your face, you can't come in here. I was like, okay, well that's conformity then. So all these, this is how collectivist or even female-led response modalities work. And then Andy, and so many of your communities, you were like, here's a place, and you found places of like feeling like belonging. But as soon as you speak any of the profane words,
Mhm. Yeah.
just now that's a human. Now I'm not saying that's specific to that cadre, but like that's just how I've experienced it in my life, and that's the that to me is again where we can find the toxic matriarchy-ness of it is because I've never watched anyone in secular paradigms figure out because I don't think it well like you're talking about I don't think it can be solved in a secular or empirical fashion entirely. Um, I've never seen belonging not include demands for conformity, especially ideological.
Can I say one thing, and then
Yeah.
I need to pop off and get
Yep.
to work here. But um, so uh, I've experienced conformity in all sorts of places.
Oh, for sure.
One of my favorite is from Conan. Like in the beginning, it's like, "What is best?" And Conan, some guy says something, and he's like, "No, that's not best."
Yeah.
And Conan's like, "Crushing your enemies, seeing them driven before you, pools of blood, hearing the lamentations of the women."
Lamentations of their women.
Yeah, so he's
So
like
hardcore.
creating this conformity around and thereby elevating the virtue of like death and destruction and raping and but
Yeah.
the more damage you do, the better.
Yeah.
Now that's very hyperbolic, but that
Yeah.
essentially is what I experienced in high school sports, in investment banking, in startup world. Like there was some version of that. Like your job is to institutionalize violence upon this population so that
Yeah.
we can take stuff for the people we care about.
Yeah.
And I've seen the opposite sets of norms enforced in nonprofit circles and HR departments and
Yeah.
Fortune 500 companies. It's like the same sort of like suppression around
Yeah.
the norm. And so it's everywhere, and we need to be vigilant. But
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you guys for having me on. I do have to get to work.
Yeah.
Well, let's do a quick vote. Brandon, should we smash the matriarchy?
Oh, sorry,
No.
Brent. That was the Brand.
Well, we could just do it all at the same time for the sake of.
Oh yeah. No,
speed.
No smashing patriarchy. No smashing. We
Yeah,
integrate.
I'm still a thumbs down, but this
I think
was a
yeah.
beautiful
Integration.
conversation. Thank you for joining us.
Integration. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon.
Okay.
All right, be well, guys.